We took a look at compression with the Fruity compressor and what it can do for your music, so you should have a good foundation of knowledge on the subject at this point. The Fruity limiter is similar, but contains more features for fine-tuning a final mix or perfectly dialing in compression or limiting of your project. I prefer this plugin when compressing pretty much any sound that it needs, and it works great as a final limiter for your overall mix. For compression of certain frequencies, such as compressing the bass in someone's voice without affecting the rest of the vocal, you will want the multi-band compressor, which we will look at later. But for now, let's take a look at compressing and limiting signal with this powerful plugin. A good thing to understand is how the Fruity limiter works in the order of operations that happen within it. When a signal goes into the Fruity limiter, the first thing to affect the sound is the compressor, then the gain controls, and then the limiter with the gate controls, and lastly the saturation setting before being sent to the output. It's good to know how this works just so you know why certain settings change the sound based on the order in which they are adjusted. The limiter opens up the limiter settings, which isn't surprising being that is the name of the plugin. But to keep with the signal flow of the plugin, we will start by looking at the compression settings. So that you aren't confused and stuck at looking at the limiter settings, change it to compression setting by clicking the letters comp that lie below the limit letters on the plugin. The first knob you see is the gain knob, which will affect the output of the compressor after compression has been placed on the input signal. So keeping with our signal path, the gain will determine the amount of signal that goes into the limiter. The threshold, ratio, and knee knobs will set the compression parameters as discussed with the Fruity compressor, and the saturation knob is actually a threshold setting for saturation. So lowering it will increase the amount of saturation placed on your signal. This particular setting is very subtle and good to play with when precision tuning your mixes. The envelope section is again an envelope for the compression, where the attack and release relate to the compression of the signal, but the severity of the attack and release slope is controlled by the curve setting. Curve 1 will produce a steep slope, while curve 8 will produce a relaxed slope. The sidechain box allows you to select a track to control the compression envelope. We discussed one way of creating sidechain compression earlier, but this option allows you to place a Fruity limiter on a mixer track and then select a different track to control the compression. Imagine that you have two tracks, one bass and one drums. In this example, we will place the limiter on the bass track and then select the drum track. Right-click the send on the bass track and select sidechain to this track. The reason for this is so that the kick will show up as an option in the sidechain list for the bass when we right-click the sidechain box. Now when you adjust the compression threshold and ratio, it will start to affect the bass based on the signal that is coming from the kick. Another cool thing to remember is that if you disable the send of the kick track to the master output, then you will only hear the bass affected by the kick signal, but the kick itself will not play. Now let's look at the limiter settings, because the noise gate settings will still follow these in the signal path of the plugin. Gain and saturation will work in the same manner, but the ceiling knob is the one to pay attention to here. The ceiling setting will determine where the overall volume needs to be attenuated or pulled down to prevent clipping or getting too loud. So if there is a part in your music that gets too loud for a brief moment, you can bring down the ceiling, and when the loud part plays, the actual volume will remain under the ceiling that you set. This is great for that final mix when you just need to make sure that no rogue sounds cause your audio to clip, and you need to ensure that all your songs play at the same volume. The envelope settings will react similarly to the envelope settings of the compressor and will affect how the limiter reacts to the input signal. To only use this plugin as a compressor without limiting, raise the ceiling to its maximum setting. The final set of controls is the noise gate controls. These are very effective with signal sounds because you can create a gate that stops the sound from playing after it drops below a certain level. The gain control in this section will determine how much gaining effect is placed on the output signal. The threshold knob will tell the limiter when to let the sound play and at what volume to stop playing it. The release time affects how quickly the gate will close, so if you want the sound to gradually fade out, you can put a longer release on the gate and this will produce that effect. Try taking a single hit sound and placing reverb on it. Now, open up an instance of Fruity limiter and adjust the gate effects. This is the best way to hear the gate in action. Typically, when there are a lot of sounds playing, the effect is not noticeable because there is always sound triggering the gate to open. The last section that I want to mention is all visual. The selections to the left of the limiter will display the input and output peaks, analysis and gain envelopes, and the level markers. And the bottom icon will allow you to adjust the scroll speed of the plugin. One thing to take note of is that this plugin will drain more power from your computer than the Fruity compressor, but in my opinion, if your computer can handle it, this is the way to clean up your final mixes.